Hi guys, and welcome to a relaxation history story. Tonight we are easing ourselves into a place where the cold does not announce itself loudly at first, but waits patient and certain just beyond the tree line. You're standing with your back to the wind boots pressed into the snow that squeaks faintly under your weight breath, rising in slow white clouds that vanish almost as soon as they appear. The cabin ahead of you looks small in a way that feels honest. No romance yet. Just wood smoke and the quiet promise of shelter. You probably will not survive this winter without changing almost everything you think you know about comfort. That is not meant to scare you. It is meant to steady you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights and let the story begin without hurry. You step inside the cabin and close the door quickly, not gently, because gentleness wastes heat. The inside smells of sap-damp wool and old smoke soaked into timber. It is not warm yet, but it's calmer. The cold outside feels sharp and alert, while the cold in here feels tired, like it has already done a long day of work. You take a moment to stand still. Frontier families learned early that rushing inside only brings snow with you. And snow turns into water, and water becomes danger. One widely accepted historical detail is that cabins in northern frontier regions were often placed facing away from prevailing winter winds, sometimes angled just enough to reduce how much cold air forced its way through door seams. That choice alone could decide how long a family lasted. You set down your pack and listen. There is a low pop from the hearth where embers are waiting. Someone has been here before you, or maybe you were here earlier and forgot how far away that time feels now. The walls are thick logs notched tightly, but you can see thin lines of darkness between them. Those gaps are stuffed with dried moss and clay. It looks crude, but it works. Some settlers even mixed animal hair into the clay to help it hold. A curious little detail passed down in journals mentions that a few of the families swore by adding wood ash to the chinking, believing it discouraged insects and spirits at the same time. Whether it worked is another matter, but belief itself offered comfort. You move closer to the fire and feel a narrow band of warmth touch your shins. Not enough to relax, just enough to remind you why you keep feeding it. A minus 40 degrees warmth is not something that fills a room. It is something that exists in specific places like islands in a frozen sea. Frontier diaries often describe this as living inside a circle where stepping 1 foot too far away from the hearth feels like stepping outdoors again. Modern historians still argue whether families truly understood the physiological dangers of extreme cold, or whether survival came mostly from learned habit passed down through observation and painful mistakes. Either way, the knowledge settled into muscle memory. You remove your outer layer slowly. Not because you are warm, but because sweat is a traitor here. Even a little moisture trapped in fabric can chill you faster than bare skin once the fire dips. You hang your coat where rising heat might dry it, not close enough to scorch. There is an art to this learned without instruction. The cabin creaks softly as logs contract. That sound will become familiar. You will learn which creaks are normal and which ones deserve attention later in the night. Outside, the wind brushes snow against the walls like fingertips testing a lock. Inside, the air feels dense. You breathe through your nose slow and careful. Some families believe breathing through the mouth at night invited sickness. This idea was not entirely superstition. Cold air can irritate lungs, and people noticed patterns long before they had words for them. Still, historians debate whether such beliefs meaningfully reduced illness, or whether they simply gave families a sense of control in an uncontrollable environment. You sit on a rough bench near the wall and let your body settle. Your hands ache with a deep, dull throb as warmth returns. That sensation is not pleasant, but it is familiar. Children were taught not to cry out during this stage. Noise wastes breath, and breath is effort. You remember reading that in some frontier households gloves were tied to sleeves with string so children would not lose them in snowdrifts. It sounds quaint now, but losing a glove then could cost fingers. Small details mattered. The light inside the cabin is low. Tallow candles were precious and used sparingly. Firelight does most of the work, painting the walls in slow movement. Shadows stretch and fold back in on themselves. You feel time loosen its grip. Without clocks, families measured evenings by the fire's behaviour, by hunger, by the way cold pressed harder against the logs after midnight. You realise already that this place does not rush you. It waits to see what you will do. You add a piece of firewood, careful not to stack too much at once. Overheating wastes fuel and dries the air too quickly. A mainstream account from the mid-19th century notes that frontier families in northern territories often burned softer woods during the day and saved denser hardwood for night when long steady heat mattered more than flame. This was not written as advice. It was simply how things were done. As you sit, you feel the cabin begin to accept you. That sounds strange, but it is how people described it. The building becomes less of an object and more of a companion. It holds your heat. It creaks in response to temperature shifts. It tells you in small ways whether tonight will be easy or demanding. You glance at the door latch and imagine the snow piling outside. You imagine the sound it will make when you open it tomorrow. Those thoughts come without panic. They are just part of being here. You lie down on a simple bed frame stuffed with straw and layered with blankets. They smell faintly of smoke and lanolin. You pull them up carefully, making sure no drafts sneak in at your shoulders. The cold presses in, but it does not win. Not tonight. Not yet. Your breathing slows. The fire settles into a steady rhythm. This is not comfort as you know it, but it is safety earned moment by moment. You close your eyes knowing winter has only just begun and let the cabin hold you for now. You wake without fully waking the way people do when the cold shifts rather than strikes. Nothing dramatic pulls you from sleep. No nightmare, no sudden noise. Just a subtle change in pressure as if the cabin has taken a deeper breath and expects you to notice. Your eyes remain closed for a moment while your body listens first. The fire is lower now, not gone but quieter. The warmth that reached your knees earlier has retreated closer to the hearth, leaving the rest of the room cool and still. You sit up slowly. Fast movement wastes heat and invites dizziness. Frontier families learned early that mornings in extreme cold required patience before action. Your breath fogs faintly in the dimness. That tells you enough. The cabin has done its job overnight, but only just. You swing your feet down and feel the floorboards solid and cold beneath wool socks. The floor is raised slightly off the ground, built that way on purpose. One widely accepted historical practice in colder frontier regions was to elevate cabins to prevent moisture and rot, even though this allowed more cold air beneath. Builders accepted that trade-off because rot meant collapse and collapse meant death. Survival favoured the long view. You move toward the walls, running your hand along the logs. They are thick, uneven, each one shaped by an axe rather than a mill. The spaces between them are packed tight but not perfect. No cabin ever was. You see where chinking has been pressed deeper in some spots, thinner in others. Families often did this work themselves, patching and repatching as seasons passed. A quirky detail from a settler's letter mentions children being tasked with checking gaps using candle flames, watching for flickers that revealed drafts. It became a game, but one with serious stakes. The placement of the cabin matters more than you might expect. You remember how it sits slightly into the slope of land, its back sheltered by a rise and a line of trees. That was not accident or aesthetics. Many frontier builders chose locations that broke wind rather than offered views. Historians still argue whether these choices came from formal knowledge passed along the trade routes or simply trial and error repeated across generations. Either way, the result was the same. Cabins that ignored wind rarely lasted long. You crouch near the hearth and coax the fire awake with practiced care. You do not dump wood on it. You feed it. Thin kindling first, then a thicker piece placed just right. The fire responds orange light, pushing back shadows inch by inch. As warmth returns, the cabin seems to stretch logs, making soft ticking sounds as they adjust. These noises might alarm someone unfamiliar, but to you they are reassurance. Silence would be worse. As the fire builds, you take stock of the room. Everything inside has purpose. There is little space for decoration when survival dictates design. The table is small, close to the hearth. Benches double as storage. Tools hang on pegs not for display, but because bending down wastes energy and time. A mainstream historical observation from frontier inventories shows that cabins often contained fewer objects than modern camping gear, yet each item was repaired, reused, and adapted endlessly. Nothing disposable exists here. You notice how low the ceiling feels? It is not an illusion. Many cabins were built with intentionally low ceilings to reduce the volume of air needing heat. Taller spaces look impressive, but they bleed warmth upward where it cannot be reached. Children learn to duck without thinking. Adults learn to accept cramped quarters as a fair price for staying alive. Comfort here is measured in degrees, not posture. Light begins to creep through the small window, muted and blue. The window itself is tiny, sometimes covered with oiled paper instead of glass in poorer settlements. Less light means less heat loss. It also means longer nights inside your own thoughts. People adapted. They told stories. They repeated tasks. They learned to sit with quiet. Some scholars debate whether the mental strain of such isolation had lasting psychological effects, or whether strong routine and shared labour counterbalanced it. Journals suggest both were true depending on the family. You wrap yourself tighter in a shawl and step toward the door. Not to open it yet, just to rest your hand on the wood. The door is thick, reinforced, and opens inward. That detail matters. Snow piling outside presses it shut rather than forcing it open. Hinges are placed carefully to avoid warping in cold. A lesser door could swell, freeze, and trap a family inside. That happened more than people like to admit. The smell of the cabin shifts as the fire strengthens. Smoke, sap old wool, and yesterday's food mingle into something familiar. This scent becomes home. Frontier letters often mention how people could recognize their own cabin by smell alone even before seeing it through snowfall. It anchored them when the world outside looked identical in every direction. You sit again, letting heat work its way back into fingers and toes. There's a dull ache then, a slow easing. You watch condensation form briefly near the window and wipe it away. Moisture is always the enemy. Damp air steals heat silently. Families learn to ventilate just enough to avoid suffocation, but not enough to invite cold. Balancing airflow was an art, not a science. Historians still argue whether carbon monoxide exposure was a hidden factor in frontier mortality, or whether people instinctively managed airflow better than records suggest. As daylight strengthens, you finally open the door a crack. The cold rushes in immediately, sharp and alert, carrying the sound of nothing. Snow stretches unbroken. The world feels paused. You close the door again, quickly sealing warmth behind you. The cabin holds. You realize something quietly profound. This structure is not impressive. It would not survive a storm of modern expectations, but it was never meant to. It was meant to hold a family through nights like this, one careful decision at a time. And so far it has succeeded. You step back from the door and let the latch settle into place with a dull wooden sound. The cabin exhales again, returning to its slow, careful stillness. Outside, the cold exists as a fact rather than a threat now that you've seen it. -40 degrees is not dramatic in the way stories suggest. It does not howl or rush. It simply waits, patient and absolute, shaping everything it touches. You learn quickly that this kind of cold behaves differently. Your breath does not billow in soft clouds for long. It snaps into the air and vanishes. Moisture leaves your skin almost immediately, pulling heat with it. Even standing still feels like movement because your body works constantly to stay balanced. One commonly accepted observation from frontier medical notes is that extreme cold dulls hunger. signals making people forget to eat until weakness reminds them. Families learn to eat by habit rather than appetite, especially in winter. You lift a kettle from near the hearth and place it closer to the coals. Water must never freeze solid inside a metal. Frozen metal can split without warning and replacements are rare. As the kettle warms, faint cracks echo from outside. Trees adjust to temperature shifts, trunks splitting under pressure. The sound carries far in the stillness, sharp and unsettling if you're not used to it. Children were often taught early that such sounds meant nothing immediate. Panic wastes warmth. You cup your hands around the kettle as steam begins to rise. Even that small warmth feels luxurious. You breathe it in carefully. Hot air soothes the inside of your nose, easing the tightness that cold brings. Some frontier families believed inhaling steam prevented winter illness. Whether it truly helped is uncertain. Historians still argue whether reduced sickness rates in certain settlements came from such practices or from sheer isolation limiting disease spread. You think about skin now. Exposed flesh behaves differently at this temperature. Pain does not always announce itself. Numbness arrives first quiet and deceptive. Diaries from Northern Territories describe frostbite being discovered hours later. Fingers pale and unresponsive long after the damage was done. Parents checked children constantly touching cheeks and ears with warm hands. A quirky detail from one account mentions mothers rubbing noses together as a playful way to check for cold damage. It looked affectionate, but it served a purpose. You wrap a scarf loosely around your face before moving toward the door again. Covering too tightly traps moisture which freezes. Covering too loosely invites sharp air. Everything here is compromise. You open the door briefly and toss out yesterday's ashes, careful to avoid drifting snow. The cold bites instantly, your eyelashes stiffen. The inside of your nose feels raw. You step back inside without lingering. Even small outdoor tasks are measured in breaths rather than minutes. As you warm again, you notice how the cabin seems smaller in winter. Not physically, but emotionally. Every object feels closer because everything matters more. You sit near the hearth and stretch your feet toward the heat, turning them slowly, so one side does not scorch while the other freezes. This slow rotation becomes instinct. People learn to read their own bodies carefully. Tingling meant blood returning. Sharp pain meant trouble. Silence meant numbness, which was worse. The cold also changes sound. Your movements seem louder. Fabric brushing fabric becomes noticeable. Even swallowing feels audible. Outside sound carries strangely far. A branch breaking half a mile away sounds close enough to touch. Some frontier families believed this meant spirits travelled more freely in winter. While that belief fades under scrutiny, it speaks to how disorienting the environment could feel. Scholars still debate how much folklore emerged directly from sensory distortion caused by extreme cold. You eat a small meal now. Dried meat, hard bread, something fatty if available. High-fat diets were not indulgence here. They were survival. A well-documented historical reality is that frontier families in cold climates consumed far more calories in winter than modern recommendations would suggest simply to maintain body heat. Butter, lard and preserved animal fat were valued more than sugar. The body burned it all without apology. As you chew, you watch a frost creep slowly along the inside edge of the window. That frost tells you the temperature outside has not improved. It probably will not until spring decides to appear, and even then winter may pretend not to notice. You learn not to hope for warmth too early. False thaws break spirits faster than steady cold. People mark time differently here. Not by dates, but by changes in light and snow texture. You pull a blanket around your shoulders and let yourself rest again. The fire settles into a steady burn. You'll keep it like this most of the day. Too hot wastes wood. Too cool invites danger. Managing heat becomes a quiet, constant task. Children learn to read the fire the way others learn to read books. They knew which flame meant safety and which meant hurry. There is a strange calm that comes with understanding this environment. Once you stop expecting comfort, you begin to notice beauty instead. The way light refracts through frost. The way silence feels full rather than empty. The way the cabin holds you not warmly but faithfully. Frontier letters often speak of this shift, the moment when fear softened into respect. The cold stopped being an enemy and became a condition. You adjust your position and feel the straw mattress rustle beneath you. Straw traps air, creating insulation beneath your body. That choice was deliberate. Feather beds were warmer but absorbed moisture. Straw could be replaced and dried more easily. Historians still argue whether such bedding choices significantly affected survival rates, but families clearly believed they mattered and belief-guided behaviour. You close your eyes, again not to sleep deeply, but to rest. The cabin continues its quiet conversation with the cold outside. Logs creak, the fire murmurs, your breath slows. You're learning moment by moment what -40 truly means. Not as a number, but as a way of living carefully within limits. You wake again to the quiet knowledge that today is about wood. Not gathering it yet, not even touching it, but accounting for it. Firewood exists in your thoughts before it exists in your hands. You sit up slowly and look toward the stacked logs along the wall, their cut ends pale and dry, their bark rough and flaking. Each piece represents time. Each one is an hour of warmth, a stretch of sleep, a morning that does not begin in panic. Frontier families measured winter not in weeks but in cords. Period household records make it clear that wood was counted, moved and protected with more care than money. In the coldest regions, a family might burn through several cords before spring dared to arrive. You understand now why cabins were often built within hauling distance of timber. Dragging wood too far in -40 conditions could cost fainers, or was it your worst? You stand and test the weight of a single log. It is heavier than it looks. Cold densifies everything. You carry it to the hearth and place it carefully, not adding it yet, just making sure it is ready. Keeping fuel close mattered. One winter account mentions a family losing precious minutes searching for wood during a night fire, dip hands shaking too badly to grip frozen logs outside. After that, they stacked fuel inside whenever possible, accepting the mess for the sake of safety. You glance toward the door and think about the wood pile beyond it. Snow has already begun to swallow the lower layers. If you leave it like that, moisture will creep in. Damp wood smokes more than it burns, choking the cabin and stealing heat. You will have to clear it later, but not yet. The sun is still low and cold mornings punish impatience. As the fire burns down slightly, you add one log, then wait. You watch how the flame catches, how it leans, how it sounds. This is not guesswork. Families learn to read fire the way others read weather. A clean flame means dry wood. A hissing sound means moisture hiding inside. Some settlers believed certain woods burned warmer than others, while oak and maple are consistently mentioned. As reliable heat sources, journals also mention people swearing by less common woods simply because they were familiar. Researchers still debate how much perceived warmth came from actual heat output versus expectation shaped by experience. You sit back and let the fire settle. There is a rhythm to feeding it that becomes almost soothing. Too much attention makes it flare, too little lets it fade. Somewhere between those extremes is steadiness. Children were often given small fire tasks early, not out of trust but necessity. Supervision came close. Mistakes were corrected quietly. Panic taught nothing. The smell of burning wood fills the cabin, sharp at first, then mellow. That smell clings to clothing, hair, skin. People carried it with them everywhere. Letters from frontier towns often remark on how visitors could identify newcomers immediately by scent alone. Smoke was not fashionable, but it was familiar, and familiarity meant survival. You kneel near the hearth and feel heat on your face while your back remains cold. This unevenness is normal. No fire warms evenly in these conditions. You rotate again, slow and deliberate. One side warms, the other waits. The body learns patience here. Complaining does nothing. Adjusting does everything. You think about nights ahead. Firewood becomes even more precious after dark. Many families practice what they called night banking, piling coals carefully and covering them with ash to slow the burn. The goal was not to keep the cabin warm, but to keep life alive until morning. A well-documented technique from northern settlements describes leaving just enough oxygen flow to preserve embers without flame. Success meant waking to warmth. Failure meant starting from cold fingers and colder fear. You notice the tools hanging near the hearth. Tongs, poker, shovel, simple shapes smoothed by use. These tools save skin. Reaching into a fire without them invites injury that cannot heal easily in winter. A strange little note from a diary describes a man carving decorative patterns into his poker handle during long evenings, not for beauty, but so he could identify it by touch alone in low light. Small adaptations like that accumulated over time. You eat again not because you're hungry, but because routine demands it. Calories become fuel as real as firewood. Fat warms from the inside. Salt keeps balance. You sip hot water slowly, letting it linger. Steam rises and fogs the air briefly before vanishing. You wipe condensation from the kettle. Moisture always tries to sneak in. Outside, the day remains pale and distant. The sun offers light, not warmth. You pull on your outer layers and prepare to step outside. This is not a long trip. It is a measured one. You open the door and feel the cold strike instantly, not violently but decisively. The air feels heavy as if it resists movement. You move toward the woodpile steps, careful breath controlled. Your eyelashes stiffen again, skin tightens. You work quickly but not hurriedly, clearing snow from the pile, pulling logs closer to the cabin wall. Your gloves grow stiff. You switch hands often to keep circulation moving. A lesser-known habit mentioned in northern settlements involved people tapping fingers rhythmically against tools while working not from boredom but to remind themselves to keep moving. Whether it truly helped circulation is uncertain, but it gave focus. You retreat inside before numbness settles. The door closes. The cabin accepts you again. You set the newly cleared wood near the hearth to dry further. Snow melts slowly, then disappears. The fire responds eagerly. This exchange between inside and outside repeats endlessly through winter. Each trip out is a calculation, each return is relief. You sit and listen to the fire. The crackle feels deeper now, steadier. You have bought time. That realization brings calm. Not joy, not comfort, but calm. Frontier families often describe this feeling as quiet success. No celebration, just the knowledge that tonight will not be the night everything goes wrong. As evening approaches, shadows lengthen early. You adjust the fire again, preparing for night. You count logs mentally, you plan when to wake and check embers. Sleep will come in pieces, that is normal. Long unbroken sleep belongs to warmer places. You lie down and pull blankets close, listening to the fire breathe. The cabin holds warmth in its limited way. Wood waits patiently for its turn to burn. And you understand now that survival here is not dramatic. It is a series of small, correct decisions made over and over, until spring remembers you exist. You wake to a strange sensation, not cold exactly, but unevenness. One side of your body feels almost comfortable, the other edged with chill. You do not move right away. You have learned that sudden shifts waste warmth. Instead, you take inventory. The fire is still alive, but barely. A faint orange glow clings to the coals like memory. This is the moment that decides the morning. You roll slowly and extend one foot toward the hearth, testing distance. Too close invites burns. Too far means waiting longer for feeling to return. Frontier families understood that warmth in a cabin like this arrives in layers, not waves. Heat does not fill space. It settles where it can and stays there stubbornly. This is why beds are placed carefully angled toward the hearth, never against an outer wall if it can be avoided. Written accounts from northern settlements consistently describe cabins feeling warmer near the floor at night and colder near the ceiling during the day, the reverse of what modern heating teaches us to expect. Without steady convection, warmth behaves unpredictably. You notice it now as you sit up, head cooler than your legs. You pull your cap down instinctively. Heat escapes upward first. You add a small piece of wood and wait. The flame takes slowly licking along the grain before committing. You do not rush it. You have learned that overfeeding a weak fire smothers it. Instead, you let the heat rebuild in stages. The cabin responds with faint creaks, not complaints, just acknowledgement. You think about the idea of comfort, how different it feels here. Warmth is not a background condition. It is something you visit. Frontier journals often mention people timing tasks to coincide with the warmest moments of the day, even if those moments were brief. Sewing, mending and writing happened near the hearth, sometimes rotated among family members so each could take a turn in the best spot. Comfort became communal rather than private. You sit on the edge of the bed and wrap a blanket around your shoulders. The fabric traps a small pocket of warmth that feels precious. You lean forward slightly, careful not to block heat from others if they were here. Shared spaces demanded awareness. One person's comfort could not come at another's expense. You notice frost tracing patterns along the inside wall where logs meet. These patterns shift subtly as the fire strengthens, retreating, then creeping back. It is a visual reminder that the cold never leaves. It only waits. A curious observation recorded in a family ledger notes children naming these frost shapes, giving them stories to soften fear. Some adults pretended not to notice, but they listened anyway. You eat again, slower this time. The food tastes dull, but it satisfies. Eating warm food matters more than taste now. The body responds quickly, blood moving, fingers tingling. You feel steadier. Period nutrition notes from frontier doctors emphasize that hot meals did more for morale than any medicine they could offer. The body and mind were not separate concerns here. As the cabin warms slightly, you remove a layer, careful to keep sweat from forming. This balance becomes second nature. Too many layers trap moisture. Too few invite cold. Families adjusted clothing, constantly adding and removing without thinking. Outsiders often misread this as indecision. It was precision. You glance toward the door and consider stepping outside again. The thought alone tightens your chest slightly. That reaction fades with experience. Exposure to extreme cold trains the mind as much as the body. Researchers still discuss whether repeated cold exposure improved tolerance physiologically, or whether people simply learn to recognize danger sooner and retreat faster. The result looked the same either way. You choose to stay inside for now. There will be time later. Instead, you tend to small tasks. You shake out blankets to release trapped moisture. You wipe condensation from the window frame. You move items closer to the hearth that need drying. Everything happens slowly. Rushing creates mistakes. The fire reaches a stable burn. Not hot, but reliable. You sit near it and feel warmth press against your shins while your back remains cool. This imbalance no longer bothers you. You have stopped expecting the room to change for you, and you change for the room. Outside, the day remains pale and distant. The sun moves without enthusiasm. Snow reflects light but gives nothing back. You watch shadows crawl across the floor and realize how quiet the world feels. No wind, no birds, just stillness. In such quiet, even thoughts sound louder. People filled that silence with routine. Repetition became comfort. You lie back down briefly, not to sleep deeply, but to rest your eyes. The fire holds steady. Your breathing slows. You feel the cabin working around you, holding warmth where it can, letting cold press where it must. This place does not promise ease. It promises fairness. You give attention. It gives shelter. As the morning wears on, you understand something that frontier families rarely wrote directly. Heat was never meant to be constant. It was meant to be enough. Enough to wake, enough to work, enough to rest again. And here in this small cabin, surrounded by deep cold, enough truly is enough. You do not lie down the way you used to. That becomes clear the moment you try. Sleep here is not something you fall into. It is something you arrange. You pause beside the bed and consider the room, the hearth, the walls, and the direction the cold prefers to travel. Then you decide where your body belongs within that quiet argument. The bed sits slightly angled towards the fire, not centered, not straight. That is deliberate. Frontier families learned through long nights that alignment mattered. Feet closest to heat regained feeling faster. Faces turned slightly away, avoided dry air and sparks. Period sketches and written descriptions show beds placed with surprising consistency across distant settlements, suggesting this knowledge travelled by word rather than design manuals. You shake out the blankets again, fluffing them gently to trap air. Air is the real insulator. Wool helps because it holds pockets even when compressed. Fur does better though. It carries its own smells and stiffness in a deep cold. You layer carefully. Heavy blanket first, then lighter ones on top. If you reverse that order, heat escapes faster. That detail shows up repeatedly in household notes rarely explained, simply stated as fact. You sit and remove your boots, not all at once, but one at a time, massaging feet briefly before sliding them under cover. Cold feet ruin sleep faster than hunger. Some families slept with boots on during the coldest weeks, loosening laces to allow circulation. Whether that helped is still debated among historians, but the practice appears often enough to suggest desperation, more than comfort. You lower yourself slowly and test the mattress. Straw shifts beneath you, rustling softly. It is not soft, but it lifts you off the cold boards. That separation matters. Accounts from early winters often mention people sleeping directly on floors before learning better, waking stiff and weaker each morning. Elevation and Selchat made a difference. You draw the blanket up and tuck them tightly along the sides, creating a narrow pocket. Wide spaces waste heat. Narrow ones hold it close. Children were sometimes bundled together like this, not out of affection but efficiency. Shared warmth worked better than extra fabric. One odd little practice described in a settler's journal mentions tying blanket corners loosely together with string to prevent them from slipping during the night. It looked crude, but it kept warmth where it belonged. You turn onto your side rather than your back. Curling slightly reduces exposed surface area. This position becomes instinct. Frontier sleep descriptions often mention people waking in the same curled posture they fell asleep in, muscles holding memory through hours of cold. Straight limbs lose heat faster. You position your head carefully. Too close to the fire and your face dries and aches. Too far and breath chills the blanket edge, creating frost where it touches fabric. You angle your mouth toward the room, breathing through your nose as much as possible. This habit appears again and again in winter letters, sometimes framed as advice, sometimes as warning. Cold air burned lungs slowly. You listen. The cabin sounds different at night. Logs settle more as temperatures drop. The fire speaks softly, popping once in a while, not loudly enough to alarm. Outside the world feels sealed. Snow absorbs sound. Distance collapses. Even your heartbeat feels audible. You do not expect uninterrupted sleep. That expectation belongs to warmer places. Here rest comes in segments. You drift awake, adjust, drift again. Frontier families accepted this rhythm, some even planned for it. One account from a northern settlement mentions adults waking intentionally every few hours to tend fire and check children, then returning to rest without complaint. Sleep was flexible. You wake briefly and sense cold creeping toward your shoulders. Without opening your eyes fully, you adjust the blanket, pulling it higher, tucking it under your chin. That movement has been practiced many times. You settle again. The fire still lives. The night continues. There is a belief recorded in several regions that sleeping with your head toward the north invited illness. Whether this came from observation or superstition remains unclear. Scholars continue to discuss whether prevailing drafts or subtle temperature differences influenced this belief. Regardless, many families oriented sleeping positions deliberately guided by whatever logic felt safe. You notice your breath warming the air beneath the blanket. That warmth stays if you do not disturb it. Sudden movements release it. You learn to move slowly even in half sleep. The body adapts. Muscles soften without collapsing. Stillness becomes skill. You wake again, this time to a sharper chill. The fire has dipped lower. You sit up carefully, keeping blankets around your shoulders, and add a single piece of wood. The flame responds hesitant but willing. You wait until it settles before lying back down. Leaving it unattended would risk losing it entirely. Many winter tragedies began with a fire that faded unnoticed. You return to your place and resume your position. Side curled, knees drawn slightly, hands tucked between thighs or under chest where warmth lingers. Hands freeze easily. Gloves sometimes stay on. One Frontier account mentions people sleeping with mittens tied together by cord so they would not be lost in the dark. It sounds excessive until you imagine fumbling for them with numb fingers. You drift again deeper this time. The cabin feels smaller now, not threatening but intimate. Every sound has meaning. Every shift matters. Sleep here is not escape, it is maintenance. You rest so you can continue. As the night stretches, you become aware of how the cold presses more insistently just before dawn. This pattern appears in countless winter notates, described without explanation. Temperatures often drop hardest in the early morning hours. Families learn to expect it. They prepared extra wood for that time. They slept lighter. You wake one last time before morning light and feel the fire still holding. Relief settles quietly. You adjust once more and allow yourself to sink into a longer rest. Your body has learned the shape of safety in this room. When morning finally approaches, it does not announce itself loudly. Light creeps in slowly. The cold remains, but you have slept, and here that counts as success. You wake with the familiar sense that the cabin has shifted around you while you slept. Not dramatically, just enough to remind you that nothing here stays still, not even wood and stone. Your first awareness is weight. The weight of layers resting on your chest, your legs, your shoulders. You do not push them away. You respect them. These layers are not clothing anymore. They are part of how you exist in this space. You sit up slowly and reach for the garments laid out near the hearth. They are arranged in the order you will put them on. That habit forms quickly. Confusion wastes warmth. You start with the inner layer, wool against skin. It scratches faintly, but it insulates even when damp, which makes it invaluable. Practical knowledge from the era shows that wool was favoured not for comfort but for forgiveness. It tolerated mistakes. You pull the garment over your head, carefully guiding arms through sleeves that feel stiff with cold. Fabric behaves differently here. It resists, holds shape, remembers yesterday's folds. You smooth it down and feel heat begin to gather underneath. That small warmth feels earned. Next comes another layer, thicker this time. Then another. You stop before it becomes too much. Overdoing it traps moisture. Settlers learnt this the hard way, peeling off frozen layers later with the fingers too numb to complain. Winter journals frequently mention the danger of sweating during the work, even light work, because sweat became ice minutes later. Staying slightly cool was safer than being briefly warm. You wrap a scarf loosely around your neck and lower face. Not tight. Tight traps breath. Breath becomes frost. A small gap allows moisture to escape. That balance appears again and again in old letters described without explanation as if everyone simply knew. Modern readers often miss how precise this knowledge was learned by repetition, rather than instruction. You pull on trousers made heavy with wear. The knees are reinforced with patches sewn long ago. These repairs tell a story. Clothing was not replaced easily. It was adapted. A small but telling practice shows up in several settlements where families deliberately oversize winter garments so they could layer beneath without restricting movement. Mobility mattered as much as insulation. You slide your feet into thick socks, then another pair, then boots that have been warming near the hearth all night. Warm boots are not a luxury, they are strategy. Cold leather stiffens and cracks. Cold boots steal heat faster than bare feet for the first few moments. Many families made it a rule that footwear never left the warm zone in winter. Losing that habit led to frostbitten toes and bitter regret. You stand and flex slowly, feeling how layers shift with you. Movement feels heavier now. Each step takes intention. You accept this. Quick movement belongs to warm seasons. Winter rewards steadiness. You reach for mittens rather than gloves. Fingers share heat better when they stay together. This preference shows up consistently in northern settlement inventories, even among families who could afford finer items. Separation wasted warmth. A curious winter note from one household mentions children calling mittens hand blankets. The name stuck. You open the door just enough to let in light and a thin blade of cold. The air feels solid as if it pushes back. You step outside only after everything is in place. The cold grips instantly. Your face tightens, your eyelashes begin to stiffen. You blink slowly, deliberately. Layering without modern materials demands awareness. There is no synthetic insulation here, no windproof shell. Just wool, fur, leather, and air. Air does most of the work. You move carefully, keeping layers from compressing too much. Compression squeezes air out. You learn how to bend without crushing warmth. As you work near the cabin, your body generates heat. You monitor it closely. Too much warmth means sweat. Sweat becomes danger. You pause often, standing still for a moment, letting heat dissipate gently rather than burst out. Frontier accounts repeatedly describe this stop-and-start rhythm during winter labour. Outsiders thought it looked lazy. It was not. You clear a path near the door, stamping snow flat to prevent drifts. Each stomp sends a small vibration through your boots. You feel the ground beneath frozen solid. You breathe through your nose, slow and controlled. Mouth breathing stings. A lesser-known habit described in early winter manuals suggests people occasionally loosened outer layers during brief pauses, letting steam escape before tightening again. Whether this reduced frostbite risk remains uncertain, but it reveals how attentively people watch their own bodies. You retreat inside after only a short while. Time outside is measured differently now. You remove outer layers, immediately hanging them near the hearth so moisture does not settle. Steam rises faintly, then fades. You wipe down leather with a cloth, preventing cracks. Small care now prevents failure later. Inside you feel warmth return gradually. Fingers tingle, toes ache faintly. That sensation tells you blood is flowing again. You sit and wait until it passes. Rushing leads to clumsiness. Clumsiness leads to accidents. You think about how little of this resembles modern ideas of layering. There is no single correct combination. There is only adjustment. Each body reacts differently. Each day demands something slightly new. Interpretations continue to differ among historians about how standardized winter clothing actually was across regions, but personal accounts suggest adaptation mattered more than uniformity. You eat again, adding fuel to your own internal fire. Warm food helps, but so does routine. The act of eating signals safety. The body relaxes slightly, you feel steadier. As the day progresses, you repeat this cycle. Add a layer, remove one, step out briefly, return, adjust again. The cabin becomes a reference point. Everything revolves around it. You glance at your clothing hanging near the hearth and realize how much of your survival depends on fabric and habit, rather than strength. Bravery plays little role here. Attention plays everything. When evening approaches, you prepare layers for night. Night clothing differs slightly. Less restrictive, more insulating. Sleeping garments are about holding warmth rather than moving. You set them near the bed, ready for later. You sit near the fire and feel heat press against your shins again. The layers do their work quietly. You're not warm, not cold. You're balanced. Outside, the cold waits. Inside, you have learned how to meet it without challenge or surrender. Just preparation. You notice the quiet first, not as absence, but as presence. It presses gently against your ears, the way cold presses against skin. Sound behaves differently here. It does not travel freely. It waits. You sit near the hearth and realize that even your breathing feels louder than it should, each inhale and exhale marked and distinct as if the cabin itself is listening. Outside, the world is hushed in a way that feels intentional. Snow absorbs noise, softening edges until distance becomes hard to judge. A movement far away sounds close. A movement nearby barely registers. Settlers wrote often about this confusion, noting how hunters misjudged distance in winter because sound no longer followed familiar rules. Practical accounts from the period suggest this silence contributed to people getting lost only yards from home. Inside the cabin, every sound carries meaning. The fire murmurs softly, not roaring, just speaking enough to reassure you that it lives. When it pops sharply, you glance over without thinking. That sound means sap trapped in wood, not danger, but your body reacts anyway. Frontier families learn to interpret fire sounds the way sailors read waves. A sudden crack meant attention. A steady hiss meant moisture, silence meant trouble. You shift slightly on the bench and the wood beneath you answers with a low groan. Logs shrink in extreme cold. They expand again near heat. This movement never stops. Some nights the cabin sounds like it is breathing. Newcomers often mistook these noises for animals or intruders. Letters from early winters mentioned sleepless nights spent gripping tools waiting for something that never arrived. With time, fear softened into recognition. You listen closely now, not out of worry, but habit. Your ears separate sounds automatically. Fire, wind brushing snow against the wall, the distant report of a tree splitting under cold stress. That last sound is startling if you do not expect it. Trees freeze from the inside out. Tension builds, then release. The noise echoes like a rifle shot, sharp and sudden, followed by deep silence. Many winter journals describe children jumping at this sound long after adults stopped reacting. You think about how silence affects the mind. Without constant noise, thoughts become louder. People filled that space intentionally. They hummed while working. They spoke aloud even when alone. One unusual custom mentioned in northern accounts involves families leaving a kettle to simmer lightly at night, not for heat but for sound. The faint bubbling reassured them that the cabin was still alive. You stand and walk slowly across the room. Each step is deliberate. Floorboards creak, not complaining, just marking your passage. You learn which boards speak louder than others. You avoid them at night when others sleep. Sound travels easily through shared spaces. Courtesy becomes quiet. The wind picks up briefly outside, sending a soft rush against the walls. Snow whispers along the logs, a sound like fabric being brushed gently. You close your eyes and listen. This sound is different from a storm. It is not aggressive. It is exploratory. The wind is testing gaps, finding edges. Builders knew this would happen. That's why chinking is packed tightly and checked often. Winter silence makes small drafts audible. You can hear cold when it moves. Historical descriptions of frontier cabins frequently mention how people located leaks by sound alone, listening for faint whistles or sighs during wind. They patched by ear as much as by sight. Light helped during day. Sound ruled at night. This reliance on hearing sharpened attention over time. People noticed things modern ears might miss. You sit again and let the quiet settle. Your breathing slows to match it. There is a strange comfort in this silence once you stop fighting it. The absence of noise feels like protection, as if the world has wrapped itself in layers the same way you have. Winter enforces stillness. Movement announces itself. Stillness hides. You think about nighttime now, how silence deepens further when darkness fully claims the land. No insects, no birds, even wind pauses, sometimes leaving a vacuum of sound that feels almost physical. Some settlers described this as oppressive. Others found it calming. Opinions remain divided among historians studying personal letters, with some emphasizing isolation and others noting a deep sense of peace. You reach for a candle and light it briefly, not for illumination but companionship. The flame flickers softly, adding a visual rhythm to the quiet. You watch it for a moment, then extinguish it. Candles are saved. Firelight is enough. The quiet returns unbroken. Your ears tune themselves to the fire again. You notice its cadence. Not steady, not random. A living pattern. When the sound shifts slightly, you add a small piece of wood without standing fully. That movement is practiced. You do not break the quiet more than necessary. A small but revealing detail appears in several winter diaries where people mention speaking to the fire softly while tending it. Not prayers exactly, more like reminders, words offered to fill the silence and focus attention. Whether this eased loneliness or simply passed time is unclear, but the habit appears often enough to feel meaningful. You lie down and pull blankets close, fabric rustles softly. That sound feels loud at first, then fades. You adjust until nothing moves. Stillness returns. You listen again, the cabin settles. Outside nothing stirs. You become aware of your heartbeat. It sounds steady, reliable. In the absence of other noise, it feels reassuring rather than intrusive. You let your breathing match it. Slow, even, controlled. Silence stretches not empty but full. Full of waiting, full of awareness. Frontier families lived inside this soundscape for months at a time. They learned to read it, respect it, and eventually trust it. Silence meant no storm. Silence meant no animal near the door. Silence meant the night was passing without incident. You drift towards sleep, again wrapped in layers of wool and quiet. The fire continues its low conversation with the air. The cabin holds steady. Outside, the frozen world remains still. In this silence, rest comes gently, not deep, not careless, but sufficient. And in this place, sufficient is a gift. You wake with hunger before you wake with thought. It is not a sharp feeling. It is heavy, slow, like a hand resting on your stomach, reminding you of work undone. Cold teaches the body to ask early. You sit up and feel the cabin around you quiet and watchful. The fire is low but steady. That is good. A steady fire means you planned well last night. You move toward food without ceremony. Eating here is not anticipation, it is maintenance. You take down a small bundle wrapped in cloth and unwrap it carefully. Inside is dried meat, dense and dark, cut thick enough to chew slowly. Alongside it, a chunk of bread so firm it must be broken rather than sliced. This is not breakfast as celebration. It is fuel. Records from frontier settlements consistently show winter diets shifting toward fat and protein almost exclusively. Flour ran out, sugar disappeared quickly, fresh vegetables were rare luxuries. What remained were foods that burned slowly and kept the body working. You chew deliberately, letting warmth spread as digestion begins. Eating slowly matters. Rushing shocks the body when it is cold. You add something fatty to the meal if you have it. A spoon of preserved fat, thick and pale, melting slightly near the fire. It coats the mouth and throat, leaving a lingering warmth that feels almost comforting. Period letters mention people craving fat intensely during winter, even those who disliked it in warmer months. The body knew what it needed long before nutrition science tried to explain it. You drink hot water, not tea or coffee. Those are luxuries. Hot water alone does much of the work. Steam warms your face, heat settles into your chest. The kettle becomes one of the most important objects in the cabin. Families guarded theirs carefully. A cracked kettle meant cold meals and greater risk. Some households even kept a second one hidden away for emergencies, though how often that saved lives remains open to interpretation. You notice how eating changes your awareness of cold. Fingers loosen, toes tingle, the ache in your joints fades slightly. This effect is temporary but noticeable. Frontier doctors writing later observed that well-fed bodies resisted frost better even without understanding why. Their notes focus less on nutrients and more on outcomes. People who ate enough lasted longer. You clean up carefully. Crumbs attract mice, mice attract problems. Food storage becomes ritual. Wrapped tightly, hung where possible, checked often. One unexpected detail from winter journals mentions families listening at night for the faint scratching of rodents inside walls, treating it as seriously as listening for wind. Food loss in winter could be fatal. You step outside briefly after eating bundled and ready. Cold hits hard again, but your body feels stronger now. You work through small tasks, clearing snow, checking the wood pile. Movement generates heat, but you monitor it closely. Sweat is still danger. You pause often, breathing slow, allowing warmth to spread without spilling over. You return inside and feel the difference immediately. The cabin feels warmer than before, even though the temperature has not changed much. This is the body adjusting, not the room. You sit near the hearth and let the fire dry your outer layers. Steam rises faintly and disappears. You turn garments slowly so nothing overheats. You think about how food shapes the day. Meals are spaced carefully, not 3 large ones, but several small ones timed with activity and rest. Frontier household routines often mention eating before sleep, not after waking. Going to bed hungry invited cold to settle deeper. That practice surprised later observers, but it made sense here. You prepare something warm again as afternoon approaches, maybe a simple broth made from bones saved earlier. It simmers quietly, filling the cabin with a faint savoury smell. That smell lifts mood more than it lifts temperature. Settlers frequently wrote about how cooking smells ease tension during long winters. Even when food was simple, aroma mattered. You sip slowly and feel the warmth linger. The broth feels thin, but it carries minerals and fat. It keeps you steady. The body works harder in cold, you feed it accordingly. As evening nears, you think ahead to night. You set aside food that requires no preparation. Eating in the dark is easier when everything is ready. Lighting candles wastes resources. Planning saves them. This forward thinking shows up repeatedly in winter records. Survival favoured anticipation. You eat one last small portion before settling down. Not enough to feel heavy, just enough to stoke your internal fire. You notice how your breathing feels smoother afterward. Cold air hurts less when the body is fueled. You sit quietly and let digestion do its war. The fire murmurs. The cabin creaks. Outside, the world remains frozen and indifferent. Inside, warmth exists in layers and moments. Researchers continue to discuss how much of frontier survival came from physical resilience versus behavioural adaptation. Food sits at the centre of that discussion. What people ate mattered when they ate mattered more. You lie down and pull blankets close. Your stomach feels warm. That warmth spreads slowly outward. You curl slightly and rest. Sleep comes easier when hunger is quiet. As you drift, you understand something simple and important. Food here is not about enjoyment. It is about keeping the body convinced that life is worth sustaining. And tonight that conviction holds. You notice the children before you hear them. That awareness settles in quietly the way responsibility does. The cabin feels smaller when there are young bodies inside it, not because of space, but because attention spreads thinner. You move differently now. You listen for breathing that sounds too shallow for stillness that lasts too long. They sleep closer to the hearth than you do. Not directly beside it, but within the narrow zone where warmth lingers longest. This arrangement appears again and again in winter household sketches drawn without explanation, as if placement needed no defence. Smaller bodies lose heat faster. Everyone knew that even if they could not explain why. You kneel beside them and check faces gently with the back of your fingers. Cheeks feel cool but not cold. Foreheads are dry. You linger a moment longer than necessary, then move on. Touch becomes a form of reassurance for you as much as for them. Children wake differently in winter. They surface slowly, reluctant to leave warmth. You do not rush them. Rushing invites tears, and tears freeze quickly in this air. You coax them awake with quiet words and small movements. A blanket lifted just enough to let cool air remind them the day has started. No sudden shocks. Clothing is prepared in advance. Smaller garments layered carefully, each piece chosen for warmth rather than appearance. Buttons are large enough to manage with stiff fingers. Ties replace buckles where possible. These details show up in surviving winter garments, altered and re-altered until they fit both body and season. Fashion had little authority here. You help them dress near the fire, turning them gently so each side warms in turn. Children complain less when they understand the rhythm. Warm one arm, then the other. Feet last. Always feet last. Cold toes make the day harder than it needs to be. There is a habit mentioned quietly in several family letters of rubbing children's feet with hands warmed near the hearth before boots go on. It looks tender, but it serves a purpose. Blood moves. Sensation returns. Boots feel less shocking. Whether this reduced frostbite risk remains uncertain, but parents trusted it enough to repeat it. Breakfast happens in stages. Small portions first. Then more. Children often struggle to eat early in the cold stomachs slow to wake. You let them sip hot water, then broth. Warmth comes before fullness. This order matters. Observations from winter settlements note fewer illnesses among children who are fed this way, though no one at the time tried to measure it formally. You keep them close indoors as much as possible. Outdoor chores are brief and supervised. When they do step outside, you watch constantly. Skin colour, breathing, movement. Children forget limits easily. They chase snowflakes. They stop to stare at nothing. You guide them back before cold settles in. Inside, you give them tasks that feel important but stay safe. Sorting kindling by size, folding cloth, holding tools while you work. Involving them keeps them moving without danger. Stillness invites chill. Purpose invites warmth. The cabin fills with small sounds now, soft questions, rustling fabric. The quiet does not vanish, but it changes texture. Some winter accounts describe parents missing this noise when children grew older, the sound serving as proof that life continued despite the cold pressing in from all sides. You notice how children adapt faster than adults in some ways. They accept rules without nostalgia. This is how winter works. This is where you sleep. This is how you eat. They complain less about what they never expected. Scholars still puzzle over whether this flexibility made younger settlers more resilient long-term, or whether the toll showed later in life. The records do not agree. As the day moves on, you watch them for signs of fatigue. Cold exhausts quietly. When they slow, you slow with them. Rest happens early and often. You sit together near the hearth, sharing warmth and silence. Stories emerge naturally, not dramatic ones, familiar ones. Repetition soothes. You notice one child pressing fingers against the glass of the small window, fascinated by frost patterns. They trace shapes with slow concentration. You let them. Curiosity warms more than motion sometimes. When evening approaches, you prepare their sleeping place first. Extra layers, extra checking. You place them where the fire's reach will last longest through the night. You plan your own rest around theirs. Adults sleep lighter when children are present. That vigilance becomes automatic. Before sleep, you check faces again. Breath steady. Bodies warm enough. You adjust blankets one last time. The cabin feels fuller now, heavier with responsibility, but also steadier. As you settle yourself nearby, you realize something quietly important. Survival here is not individual, it is collective. Children change how you measure success, not by how comfortable you are, but by how safely they pass through the night. The fire glows low and patient, the cold waits outside as always. Inside, small bodies sleep held by layers of wool wood and careful attention. And for now, that is enough. You learn to respect moisture long before you learn to fear cold. Cold announces itself clearly. Moisture highs, it slips into fabric, settles into wood, lingers in breath and sweat and melted snow. Then it waits. In a place like this, dampness does not feel dramatic, it feels ordinary. And that is what makes it dangerous. You wake and notice the air first. It feels heavier than it should. Not colder, just thicker, as if it resists your breath slightly. You sit up and scan the cabin, eyes moving to familiar trouble spots. The window frame, the door seam, the corner near the hearth where steam sometimes drifts before disappearing. You stand and move closer, touching surfaces with bare fingers. Wood feels dry in most places. good. But near the door there is a faint slickness. Snow has melted from boots during the night and soaked into the floorboards. That moisture will freeze again if left alone, lifting splinters, cracking seams. You fetch a cloth and wipe it up, slowly pressing rather than rubbing. Rubbing spreads water. Pressing removes it. This technique appears quietly in many household notes, rarely explained, simply repeated. People learned what worked and stopped questioning it. You hang boots closer to the hearth, not too close. Leather dries slowly or it stiffens and splits. You rotate them every so often, checking with your hands rather than your eyes. Touch tells you more. Cold leather feels different from dry leather. That distinction becomes instinct. You think about sweat now. Even sitting still, the body releases moisture. Breathing alone adds it to the air. In warmer places, this goes unnoticed. Here it collects. Families learn to manage it by cracking the door briefly, even in deep cold, letting damp air escape in exchange for sharp freshness. This practice seems counterintuitive, yet winter journals frequently describe it as necessary. The timing mattered. Too long invited cold, too short did nothing. You open the door just a hand's width and count breaths. 1, 2, 3. You close it again. The cold rushes in and out quickly, like a guest who knows they are not welcome. The air inside feels lighter almost immediately. You return to the hearth and adjust the fire, slightly encouraging warmth without smoke. Clothing demands constant attention. You peel off inner layers carefully and inspect them. If fabric feels even slightly damp, it must be dried. Not later. Now. Damp wool steals heat faster than bare skin once the fire weakens. You hang garments where rising warmth can reach them, spacing them so air flows between. Piling traps moisture. Separation releases it. An overlooked habit mentioned in several winter accounts involves turning clothing inside out while drying. This exposed seams and thickened areas that held moisture longest. People notice garments dried faster this way, even without understanding why. It became routine. You sit and watch steam rise faintly from fabric, then fade. That moment feels like progress. You breathe easier knowing warmth will last longer tonight because of this attention. The walls themselves demand care. Logs absorb moisture from air and release it slowly. If too much builds up, mold follows even in cold. You inspect chinking with your fingers, pressing gently to check firmness. Loose areas invite drafts and dampness together. You make a mental note to patch one section later, mixing clay and ash if needed. That mixture appears often in winter repairs, favoured for how it dried firm without cracking. You remember a peculiar note from a northern settlement where families added crushed charcoal to patching material, believing it absorbed dampness. Whether that belief held scientific truth remains unresolved, but the practice persisted long enough to suggest it helped in some way. Breathing becomes part of moisture management too. You avoid heavy exertion indoors. Tasks are paced deliberately. Fast movement fogs the air, fog settles. You choose steadiness instead. Even speaking loudly adds moisture. Winter encourages quiet for many reasons. You eat warm food again, not only for calories, but to help dry the air slightly through heat. The kettle stays active most of the day, moved closer or farther from the coals as needed. Steam is useful in small amounts. Too much becomes a problem. Balance returns as theme again. As afternoon fades, you check bedding. Blankets absorb breath during sleep. You shake them out gently near the fire, releasing trapped moisture before night returns. This habit appears consistently in household routines even when time was scarce. Sleeping in damp bedding invited chills that lingered for days. You notice the children now, their movements slower, cheeks flushed. You check collars and leaves, ensuring no dampness clings there. Moisture at wrists and neck chills fastest. You dry those areas carefully. Children accept this without complaint. They know the routine. You crack the door again briefly as evening approaches, exchanging air one last time. The cabin settles afterward, warmth redistributing slowly. You add wood to the fire and watch how flame responds. Clean burn. Little smoke. That tells you moisture is under control. Night deepens. You lie down and notice how the air feels lighter against your face. Breathing is easier. Blankets feel warmer. These are small victories invisible to outsiders, but essential here. People later tried to describe frontier survival as battle against cold. That image misses something important. The real struggle was against dampness, against the slow creep of moisture that weakened warmth from within. Cold could be managed. Wetness demanded vigilance. You close your eyes and listen to the fire settle. The cabin holds steady. The air remains dry enough. The night stretches ahead without threat. Sleep comes gently when you know you have done what you can. And in this place that knowledge is as warming as the fire itself. You wake before you want to, not because of noise, but because of awareness. Something inside you has learned to listen even while resting. The fire has changed its voice. Not silent, not urgent, just thinner. You open your eyes and sit up slowly, keeping blankets wrapped around your shoulders as you move. Night work always begins this way. Half awake, careful. You swing your legs toward the hearth and feel the floor's cold reach up immediately. That contact sharpens your focus. You crouch near the fire and peer into the coals. There is still life there, a faint red glow tucked beneath ash. Enough if you treat it correctly. You add kindling first, thin, dry pieces that catch without complaint. You wait. Rushing smothers embers. Waiting encourages them. This patience is learned. Early settlers often wrote about losing fires at night from feeding them too aggressively while tired. Those lessons stayed. As flame returns, you warm your hands, palms open, fingers spread. You do not hold them too close. Burns here heal slowly. You rotate your wrists, encouraging blood to move. The ache that follows feels almost welcome. It means feeling has returned. You glance around the cabin without fully standing. Everyone is still asleep. You keep it that way. Night vigilance is meant to preserve rest, not disrupt it. You move quietly, placing a larger log once the fire steadies, listening for the low sound that tells you it is seated properly. Firewatching is not heroic, it is repetitive and calm. People sometimes imagine frontier nights filled with drama, but most were filled with waiting. Waiting for embers to strengthen, waiting for wood to catch, waiting for dawn. Winter journals often mention how these hours felt longer than the day itself. You sit back and let warmth rebuild. Your breath slows. The cabin responds. Logs creaks softly as the temperature shifts. This sound no longer startles you. It feels like confirmation that the structure is still doing its work. You think about how many times this routine repeats across the season. Hundreds of nights, thousands of small decisions. No single moment defines survival. It accumulates quietly. Researchers examining frontier mortality later struggle to pinpoint causes because so many failures came from chains of small missteps rather than single events. You check the kettle, moving it slightly closer to the heat. Warm water will be ready when morning arrives. That preparation matters. Starting the day cold costs energy you cannot spare. People learn to shape mornings the night before whenever possible. You rise just enough to check bedding. Blankets remain in place. No one has kicked free an edge that would invite cold. You adjust one corner gently, barely disturbing the sleeper beneath. That motion feels practiced, careful. There's a strange intimacy in these hours. You are awake when the world is not. Outside the cold deepens, temperatures often dip hardest just before dawn. This pattern appears in weather notes scribbled in margins of journals observed long before it was explained. Families learned to expect it. Extra wood was saved for these hours. You add another log, denser this time, one meant to burn slowly. The flame changes character, settling into a deeper glow. This is what you want, not brightness, endurance. You sit again and wait. Waiting becomes skill. You learn to tell when the fire is stable enough to leave. You do not rely on sight alone. You listen. A steady, low sound tells you the heat is spreading evenly. Sharp pops mean adjustment is needed. While you wait, your thoughts wander gently. You think about the rhythm of nights like this, repeating across settlements scattered through vast cold regions. Different cabins, Different families, same quiet vigilance. The shared experience links people who never met. One small detail from a winter account describes someone humming softly while tending the fire, not to entertain themselves, but to stay awake just long enough. The tune did not matter. The sound anchored them. Whether this habit helped or simply passed time is unclear, but it appears often enough to feel familiar. You hum now without realizing it. The sound is low, almost swallowed by the fire. You stop when you notice smiling faintly at yourself. Even alone habits persist. You stretch slowly, keeping movement minimal. Your body feels stiff but capable. You have learned how to rest without fully relaxing. Muscles stay ready. This half tension becomes normal. When you are satisfied the fire will hold you, return to the bed. You slide back under blankets, carefully trapping warmth again. The space you created earlier remains. You fit into it like a puzzle piece. Sleep returns in fragments. You drift, wake, drift again. Each time the fire remains steady. That steadiness reassures you more than deep sleep ever could. As dawn approaches, light begins to press faintly against the window. Not bright, just present. The cold remains fierce outside, but inside the cabin feels balanced. You have held the night. Morning will come with its own work. For now you rest knowing the vigil succeeded. In this place that quiet success carries you forward. You wake with your hands already aching even before you move them. That dull stiffness settles into joints during the night, creeping in quietly while the body rests. You keep your fingers curled for a moment longer, beneath the blankets letting warmth gather, before asking them to work. You have learned that forcing movement too soon leads to clumsiness, and clumsiness costs more than time. When you finally sit up, your eyes go immediately to the tools hanging on the wall. They wait where you left them, close enough to the hearth to stay usable. Metal left too far from warmth becomes a liability. Cold iron steals heat faster than bare wood. This is why handles are thick and worn smooth, shaped to be held with mittens on not bare hands. Tools here are not elegant. They are forgiving. You rise slowly and cross the room, feeling the floorboards through your soles. Cold seeps upward, reminding you that fingers are not the only things that need protection. You crouch near the hearth and warm your hands before reaching for anything metal. That order matters. Many early winter injuries happened not from dramatic accidents, but from rushing this step. You pick up the poker and test its weight. It feels right, balanced, familiar. This tool has saved fingers more times than you can count, keeping skin away from flame and embers. Some frontier households customize their tools in small ways, wrapping handles in cloth or leather scraps so they could be gripped without pain. Those wraps were replaced again and again, each layer telling a quiet story of winter survived. You tend the fire with deliberate movements. Push coals together, clear ash just enough. Place wood where it will catch without protest. You listen for the sound that tells you the fire is healthy. Not loud, not frantic, steady. When that sound settles, your shoulders ease slightly. You turn your attention to the rest of the cabin. Knives are wiped clean after every use, even when exhaustion sets in. Food residue attracts pests. Pests bring problems. A small habit described in several winter households involved rubbing blades with fat after cleaning to prevent rust. Whether that practice extended tool life significantly is uncertain, but people trusted it enough to keep doing it. You check the axe next, running a cloth along the head to remove any moisture. The edge is kept sharp not for speed but for safety. Dull blades glance off frozen wood unpredictably. This lesson appears repeatedly in accident accounts, mentioned plainly without drama. Sharp tools demand respect. Dull ones invite mistakes. You set the axe back in its place, angled so the handle rests against the wall. If it falls, it could crack in the cold. Wood becomes brittle at these temperatures. Everything feels less flexible. You adapt by moving slower, thinking further ahead. You pick up a small handsaw and flex it gently, checking for stiffness. Saws are used sparingly in winter. Sawdust clings to moisture and freezes. Splitting logs is preferred when possible. These choices shaped how cabins were stocked and how wood was prepared months earlier, long before snow fell. You notice your fingers warming, now stiffness easing. You rotate your wrists and feel blood return. This moment is familiar. It signals that you can begin work safely. You resist the urge to hurry. Winter rewards restraint. You step outside briefly with a tool in hand, breath-controlled eyes scanning the ground. Frozen tools behave differently outdoors. Metal contracts further. You keep movement smooth. Jerky motions snap handles and strain joints. You complete the task quickly and return inside without lingering. Back near the hearth, you inspect the tool again. No cracks, no ice forming in joints. You wipe it dry and hang it back in place. Care at the end of use matters as much as care at the beginning. Many winter failures began with tools left damp and forgotten. You think about how these habits formed. No one sat down and wrote rules. People watched what broke. They remembered what hurt. Over time, routine settled into something that looked like tradition. Different families did things slightly differently. Some wrapped handles thicker. Some kept tools closer to heat. There was no single correct way, only ways that worked often enough to be trusted. You move through the rest of the cabin, checking small things. Pegs secure, hinges free of frost, latches moving smoothly. These checks take minutes, but they prevent hours of trouble later. Inter magnifies small neglects. As the day continues, you feel your hands grow steadier. They move with less thought, now guided by habit. You work near the hearth when possible, stepping away only when necessary. Warmth keeps grip reliable, cold steals precision. You sit down eventually and rest your hands in your lap, palms up, letting heat settle into them fully. The ache fades to a memory. You flex fingers, slowly feeling strength return. There is a quiet satisfaction in this moment. Not pride, just relief. Your hands are still yours. They will work tomorrow. Outside, the cold remains unchanged. Inside, your tools hang ready, dry and waiting. You've done what needed doing today. That is enough. You feel the change in the room before you acknowledge it. The cabin has warmed just enough that closeness becomes noticeable. Bodies shift. Blankets overlap. Space rearranges itself without discussion. When winter deepens, distance becomes inefficient. Warmth shared is warmth saved. You sit near the hearth and watch how people naturally drift closer together as the day fades. Not all at once, not with intention, just a gradual narrowing of space. The shoulders touch, knees brush, no one apologizes. There's nothing awkward about it here. This closeness is practical, not sentimental. Sleeping arrangements adjust accordingly. Beds are pulled closer. Straw mattresses are laid side by side. Sometimes they overlap slightly, edges pressed together, so cold air cannot creep in between. Accounts from long winters mention families sleeping in configurations that would seem strange in warmer months, but made perfect sense when heat was scarce. Proximity reduced loss. That was enough reason. You remember how children are placed between adults, not because they are smaller, but because they are warmer when protected on both sides. Adults take the colder edges. This pattern appears again and again in recollections rarely explained. It simply worked. Bodies became barriers against the night. You arrange blankets carefully overlapping them rather than stacking them separately. Separate coverings leave gaps. Gaps invite cold. Overlap creates continuity. The fabric forms a shared envelope. Inside it, breath warms air gradually. This warmth belongs to everyone beneath. You lie down and feel another body close beside you. The warmth is immediate, subtle, but undeniable. Heat transfers without effort. Muscles relax slightly. Breathing slows. People learn to sleep lighter in these shared arrangements, waking easily if someone shifted too much or pulled a blanket away. Light sleep kept balance. Some winter letters describe how families developed unspoken rules about movement during the night. Turn slowly, adjust carefully, never yank. These habits prevented conflict and kept warmth where it was needed. Comfort depended on cooperation. You notice how the cabin sounds change when bodies gather. Breathing overlaps, the fire's crackle blends into the background. Even the creaking logs seem quieter, as if muffled by presence. The room feels fuller, steadier. Clothing changes at night too. Fewer layers, more shared warmth. Outer garments are removed to avoid stiffness and moisture buildup. Inner layers remain. Skin never meets cold air directly. This balance took time to learn. Early winters taught harsh lessons about sleeping in outdoor clothing that trapped sweat and froze. You think about modesty and how it shifts under pressure. Winter does not erase boundaries, but it softens them. Privacy becomes flexible, or survival reshapes priorities. People adapted without ceremony. What mattered was making it through the night intact. You remember a small note from a family journal describing how they marked sleeping places with knots and blankets so everyone knew where to settle in the dark. That detail seems trivial until you imagine fumbling at night with numb fingers trying not to disturb warmth. Such small systems prevented confusion. You adjust your position slightly, careful not to disturb the shared pocket of heat. Someone beside you exhales slowly. The sound feels reassuring, proof of life, proof of warmth continuing. Out each side, the cold presses harder as night deepens. Inside, bodies hold their own small climate. This contrast defines winter living. The world beyond the walls becomes irrelevant once the door is closed and latched. You wake briefly during the night and feel a hand resting against your arm. It is not intentional, just contact. You do not pull away. That warmth matters. You shift just enough to maintain balance and settle again. Shared sleep does not mean deep rest. It means managed rest. People wake often. Someone always wakes. That vigilance spreads responsibility. No one carries it alone. This shared awareness appears frequently in winter recollections, sometimes described as comfort, sometimes as exhaustion. Both can be true. You notice how the fire is banked lower tonight. With bodies clustered, less heat is needed. Wood lasts longer. This economy mattered. A single log saved at night could mean warmth weeks later. Families learn to calculate these savings instinctively. As morning approaches, you wake with stiffness but not cold. That difference feels significant. The shared warmth has done its work. You stretch slowly, careful not to wake others too abruptly. Morning will come soon enough. You rise and step away quietly, wrapping a blanket around your shoulders to preserve heat as you move. The space you leave cools almost immediately. That reminds you how fragile warmth is here. You tend the fire gently, adding wood while others sleep. Flame grows slowly. Heat spreads. When the room warms again, people stir. Shared sleep dissolves back into individual space without comment. You look around and see faces relax, colour return to cheeks. This sight reassures you more than any number on a thermometer ever could. The night has passed without harm. You realise there's something quietly important. Shared warmth is not just physical. It creates rhythm, it spreads responsibility, turns survival into something collective rather than solitary. As the day begins, you fold blankets and reset the room, preparing for the next cycle. Winter will demand closeness again tonight. You accept that easily now. The cabin feels steady. The cold waits outside. Inside, you have learned how to meet it together. You become aware of the air long before you think about breathing. It has a texture now, a weight that shifts depending on what the fire is doing and how many bodies are awake. You inhale slowly and notice the faint bite at the back of your throat. Not painful, just present. This is the balance you live inside. You sit up and watch how breath moves in the cabin. In the coldest hours, you can see it drift briefly before fading. As the fire strengthens, it disappears faster. That change tells you more than sight outside ever could. People here learn to read air the way others read clocks. You crack the door open slightly and feel the sharpness rush in. Fresh air cuts through the heaviness instantly. You close it again after a few breaths. The cabin responds slowly, warmth reclaiming space inch by inch. This exchange happens several times a day. It feels risky at first, letting cold in on purpose, but experience teaches restraint. Air that grows too stale steals energy quietly. Letters from long winters often mention headaches and dizziness without clear cause. Over time, families learned that these faded when fresh air was allowed to circulate even briefly. No one used scientific terms, they simply noticed patterns and adjusted habits. Different households found different rhythms that worked. You move the kettle slightly farther from the coals. Steam is helpful but only in moderation. Too much moisture thickens the air and chills faster when the fire dips. You wipe condensation from the window frame again. That frost line tells you where breath settles most heavily at night. You breathe through your nose whenever possible. Cold air warms slightly that way before reaching your lungs. Mouth breathing stings and dries. Children are reminded of this, constantly corrected gently until the habit sticks. Some families even covered mouths loosely at night with cloth to guide breathing without restricting it. You notice how sleeping positions affect air too. Faces turned towards walls collect frost on blankets by morning. Faces angled toward open space fare better. These small observations shaped how beds were placed and how people slept. No one argued about it. They just moved things until mornings felt easier. You stir the fire and watch smoke behavior closely. Smoke that lingers signals poor airflow. Smoke that rises cleanly tells you the draft is right. Chimneys freeze, sometimes narrowing passage. When that happens, air grows heavy fast. You stay alert for that change, ready to adjust before it becomes dangerous. You recall an odd habit from winter stories where people kept a feather near the hearth, watching how it moved to judge airflow. Whether this truly helped is hard to say, but it gave a visual cue in low light when smoke was hard to see. The habit persisted long enough to feel useful. As the day progresses, you feel breathing become easier. The cabin finds its balance. You sit and rest, noticing how much effort breathing takes compared to warmer places. Cold demands work even from the lungs. This effort tires people quietly. Regular pauses become necessary. You step outside briefly and breathe deeply. The cold air feels sharp but clean. You return inside after only a moment, letting warmth reclaim you. That contrast resets your awareness. Inside air feels heavier now but manageable. Evening approaches and you plan for night. You bank the fire, carefully aiming for slow, steady burn. Airflow must be just right. Too much draft wastes heat. Too little smothers flame and thickens air. This balance becomes instinct over time. You lie down and notice how breathing changes under blankets. Warm air collects quickly. You shift slightly to avoid trapping moisture near your face. You learn to create a small opening without inviting chill. That position holds through the night. You wake briefly and feel the air has changed again. The fire has dipped. Breath feels cooler. You adjust the blanket and turn your face slightly. Small corrections prevent bigger problems later. Morning comes quietly. You sit up and breathe easily. No headache, no dizziness. The air has behaved. That success feels subtle but important. You stretch and move toward the hearth, knowing this cycle will repeat. Air will thicken, air will clear. You will guide it gently each time. In this place, breathing is not automatic. It is part of living well. And you have learned how to do it here. You wake, and for a moment you cannot tell whether it is night or morning. Darkness has weight here. It lingers, it settles into corners and refuses to lift just because the clock inside your body expects light. You lie still and listen. The fire speaks softly. Someone shifts in sleep. Nothing urgent calls you up. This is what the long dark does. It stretches time until it feels thick, almost physical. Days shrink. Nights expand. You stop measuring them in hours and start measuring them in tasks completed, fires tended, meals shared. The mind adapts, but not without effort. You sit up and notice how little light the window offers. A faint blue hint, not enough to brighten the room, only enough to confirm the world still exists outside. Winter journals often describe this colour pale and distant, as if daylight itself has thinned. You understand the description now. Light feels rationed. You move closer to the hearth and warm your hands, watching shadows slide across the walls. Firelight becomes the main storyteller in winter, shaping evenings and mornings alike. People learn to work by it, eat by it, rest by it. Candles were saved. Fire did the heavy lifting. You think about how darkness affects mood. Without clear beginnings and endings to days, emotions blur. Some mornings feel like evenings, some nights feel endless. Families responded by creating small anchors. Fixed meal times, fixed chores, fixed bedtime rituals. Not because they needed structure in theory, but because routine reminded them that time was still moving forward. You stir the fire and watch how flame brightens the room briefly before settling again. That brief flare feels encouraging. You take it as permission to begin the day, even if the light outside does not agree. Children wake slower now. You let them. Rushing in darkness disorients. You speak softly using names grounding them. Sound replaces light as guide, voices help locate the day. You prepare a simple morning routine that looks the same no matter how dark it is. Warm drink, small meal, layering clothes, checking the fire. This sameness calms the mind. It removes decisions that would otherwise feel heavier in the dark. There are moments when the darkness presses harder than cold ever does. Sitting alone near the hearth watching the fire burn low, you feel how easy it would be to let thoughts spiral. Winter letters sometimes hint at this without naming it, mentioning restlessness, irritability, or the feeling of being watched by the night itself. Whether this came from isolation or simply fatigue is difficult to separate. You counter it by staying busy. Hands moving, fire tended, tools checked. Motion creates its own light. Even small tasks push darkness back a little. Outside, the sky remains dim, even when the day reaches its brightest point. You step out briefly and look up. The sun hangs low, more suggestion than presence. You do not linger. Cold and darkness together drain energy quickly. Back inside, you close the door and feel relief settle in your chest. The cabin feels warmer than before, though little has changed. Familiarity creates comfort even when conditions stay harsh. As evening approaches, it feels less like a transition and more like continuation. Darkness deepens, but it was never gone. You light a candle briefly for a task that needs precision, then snuff it out. Firelight resumes its role. Stories become more important now, not grand ones, familiar ones, told slowly, repeated. Each retelling reassures the listener that the teller is still there. Voices anchor people when light cannot. You notice how sleep comes differently in prolonged darkness. Dreams blur into waking thoughts drift like dreams. You accept this without alarm. Many people before you experienced the same thing and learned not to fight it. You lie down and pull blankets close, creating a small island of warmth and certainty. The darkness presses in from all sides, but it cannot cross this boundary, not tonight. As you drift towards a sleep, you understand something quietly. Winter is not just endured with fire and food, it is endured with patience, with routines that make time visible again, with small lights that remind you where you are. The fire settles, the cabin creaks softly. Darkness remains, but it no longer feels endless. You breathe evenly and let rest come. You wake to a sound that does not belong to the fire. It is not loud, it is not sharp. It is a low, deliberate noise like wood clearing its throat. You stay still and listen again. The cabin answers with another quiet response. A shift, a settling. Nothing urgent yet, but enough to earn attention. You rise slowly and place your feet on the floor, feeling for the familiar boards. In winter, the cabin speaks more often. Logs tighten and relax as temperatures change. Nails complain, beams adjust. People who lived like this learned to hear the difference between ordinary movement and warning. The skill is subtle. It takes time. You walk the perimeter of the room, hand brushing lightly along the walls. Touch confirms what ears suggest. The logs feel solid, cold at the edges, warmer, closer to the hearth. You pause near one corner where sound travelled oddly. You press your palm against the chinking and feel resistance. No give. That is good. Cabins built far from help were never meant to be silent. Silence would mean stiffness, and stiffness would mean fracture. The constant low conversation of wood adjusting to cold is what keeps everything intact. Old settlers sometimes wrote that a quiet cabin made them uneasy. They trusted noise more than stillness. You kneel near the hearth and look up at the beam above it. Heat dries wood unevenly. Cracks can appear, slowly hairline at first, then widening if ignored. You tilt your head and follow the line of the beam with your eyes. It holds. No new shadows, no sag. You let your shoulders ease slightly. You remember reading a winter note where someone described waking each night to count creaks, treating them like landmarks. The third creak meant the roof had settled. The fourth meant the fire needed attention. It sounds obsessive until you realise that these sounds were the only early warnings available. Once a beam failed, options vanished quickly. You step outside, briefly wrapped and alert, and look at the cabin from the cold side. Snow piles against the lower logs, insulating them while also hiding stress. You clear a small area near the foundation, listening as packed snow breaks away. The cabin responds with another low groan. You nod to yourself. It is adjusting, not breaking. Back inside, you add a log to the fire to encourage steady heat rather than sudden flare. Sudden changes strain wood. Slow warmth allows it to move without splitting. This preference for gradual heat appears quietly in winter routines passed down without explanation. People notice which cabins lasted. You sit and listen again. The sounds settle into a familiar rhythm. Pop from the fire, soft shift from the wall, the distant report of a tree adjusting outside. These noises overlap and soften each other. You learn to hear them as a whole rather than individually. As the day goes on, temperature shifts slightly. The sun moves behind clouds. Cold deepens again. The cabin responds. A new creak sounds near the doorframe. You walk over and test the latch. It moves smoothly. No binding. Binding would mean swelling or ice. You make a note to check it again later. You notice how smell changes when wood cracks. A faint sharpness enters the air, resin exposed. It is subtle but present. You file that sensation away. Smell becomes another sense you rely on. Smoke smells different from sap. Damp wood smells different from dry. Your awareness expands to include all of it. Children learn this language too, though they do not name it. They pause when a sound repeats. They glance toward walls instinctively. They ask fewer questions than you expect. The cabin teaches quietly. You sit near the hearth and feel warmth steady the room. The fire acts like a mediator, easing tension between cold outside and structure inside. Too little heat and wood stiffens. Too much and it dries too fast. You adjust again, adding a smaller piece rather than a large one. Evening approaches and the cabin settles further. You hear a deeper shift now, lower in tone. You stand and place your ear near the wall. The sound has already passed. That tells you enough. Movement finished. No follow-up noise. You relax. Some families reinforced beams midwinter when sounds worried them, adding supports cut hastily from spare timber. Others trusted the original structure. Different choices led to different outcomes. Not every cabin failed the same way. Experience varied by location, materials, and luck. You remember an odd practice mentioned once where someone tapped walls lightly with a knuckle each morning, listening for changes in sound. Whether that truly revealed weaknesses is uncertain, but it gave them a sense of control. Control matters when the environment offers so little. You lie down briefly and let your body rest while your ears stay half awake. This balance becomes natural. You do not fear the sounds anymore. You respect them. They tell you when to act and when to wait. Night deepens. The cold presses harder. The cabin answers with more frequent conversation. You wake once to check the fire and listen again. Everything holds. You add a log and return to bed. As you settle, you feel a quiet trust form. Not blind trust, informed trust. The kind that comes from paying attention over time. You know this cabin's voice now. You know which sounds belong and which would not. Morning arrives slowly. Light touches the window faintly. The cabin creaks one last time as temperatures shift again. You sit up and smile slightly. It is still standing. It will stand today. You rise and begin your routine confident that listening will keep you ahead of trouble. In a place like this, survival often comes down to hearing what others might ignore. And tonight the cabin spoke clearly enough. You wake with the feeling that you are not alone even before you open your eyes. It is not fear, it is awareness. The kind that sharpens quietly when winter has taught you to listen for more than weather and wood. You lie still and let the scents settle. The fire breathes, the cabin holds. Outside something moves. You sit up slowly and peer toward the door. No scratching, no thump, just the faint impression of presence as if the snow itself has shifted shape overnight. You pull on layers and move closer to the window, careful not to brush frost loose. The glass is clouded, but you can make out a darker patch near the edge of the clearing. Tracks. Animals come closer in winter. Hunger pulls them in the same direction as cold, toward shelter, toward warmth, toward anything that promises effort rewarded. This is not an invasion, it is convergence. People and animals reading the same landscape. You open the door just enough to look. Cold spills in immediately, sharp and alive. The tracks are clearer now. Light paw prints pressed into snow, careful exploratory. Likely a fox or a dog gone feral. Too small for threat, too close for comfort. You close the door again and latch it firmly. Cabins in remote regions were never isolated in the way maps suggest. Wildlife passed through constantly. Some animals learned routes that led from one shelter to the next, following scraps, warmth, or curiosity. Families learned to recognize tracks the way they recognize neighbors' boots. Each pattern carried information. You check food storage first, nothing disturbed. The hanging bundle sways slightly untouched. Good. You tap it gently, listening for movement. Nothing. Mice leave different signs. These tracks belong to something larger. You stir the fire and let smoke rise a little thicker than usual. Smoke discourages animals more reliably than noise. Noise invites investigation. Smoke suggests human presence without challenge. This practice shows up quietly in winter habits, not explained, just repeated. You listen again. Outside nothing moves now. Animals pass through more often than they linger. Lingering costs energy. You return to your morning routine, aware but calm. Later, as daylight strengthens slightly, you step outside to tend a small task near the cabin wall. You carry a stick and tap the ground lightly ahead of you, not aggressively, just enough to announce yourself. Animals prefer warning to surprise. This understanding grows from observation, not bravado. You notice how snow near the cabin is packed and discoloured in places. Old tracks overlap new ones. Animals circle shelter, cautiously testing. You clear a small perimeter, stamping snow flat so fresh tracks will stand out later. This habit appears in several winter routines, a quiet way of staying informed. Back inside, you hang your outer layers and warm yourself slowly. Your heart rate settles. The sense of presence fades. This exchange happens often. Wildlife comes and goes. Winter blurs boundaries. As afternoon passes, you hear a sound near the woodpile. A scrape, a pause. You move toward the door and listen. The sound stops. You wait. Patience matters here. Opening the door too quickly startles animals into unpredictable movement. You step outside cautiously and see nothing but a log has shifted. Something nosed it. You reset the pile, stacking tighter, making access harder. Small adjustments discourage return visits. Animals seek easy calories, not puzzles. You think about how families adapted to this quiet coexistence. Traps were set when necessary. Food was protected. But constant hostility wasted energy. Most encounters ended with mutual avoidance. Winter forced everyone into efficiency. As night approaches, you bring scraps inside rather than leaving them near the door. Smells carry farther in cold air. Even frozen scents linger. You wipe surfaces carefully. Attention to these details reduces nighttime disturbances. You sit near the fire and listen again. The cabin feels steady. No movement outside. The silence feels different now. Less empty. More settled. You lie down and pull blankets close. Outside, the animals move on, following their own paths through the snow. Inside you rest knowing you share this land even now. In the deepest cold, survival is rarely solitary. It is negotiated moment by moment with everything else that lives. Tonight, that negotiation holds. You wake to the feeling that something is wrong though nothing hurts. The fire still glows, the cabin still stands, and yet your body feels heavier than it should, as if moving would take more effort than usual. You sit up slowly and test your balance. The room tilts for a moment, then steadies. That pause tells you enough. Illness in winter does not arrive dramatically. It slips in quietly disguised as fatigue or chill or a vague sense of being out of step with the day. You press your palm against your forehead, then your chest. Warm enough, breathing steady, no sharp pain. Still something lingers. You do not ignore it. People who live through winters like this learn to pay attention to small changes. Waiting for symptoms to become obvious often meant waiting too long. You adjust your plans immediately, easing the pace of the morning. Fire first, warm drink second, movement later. You bring the kettle closer and wait for water to heat. Steam rises gently. You breathe it in without thinking. The warmth eases tightness behind your eyes. You sit and let it work. Rest becomes treatment here. There are no doctors nearby. There is only observation. You notice how the children move more slowly today as well. One cough dry and brief. Another clears their throat and goes quiet again. You exchange a look with the other adults. No alarm, just awareness. You keep them closer to the hearth, assign quieter tasks. Sorting, folding, sitting. Winter sickness spreads differently. People live close together. Air is shared. Warmth is shared. That closeness keeps bodies alive, but it also passes illness easily. Families learn to respond not by isolating completely, which was often impossible, but by adjusting routines. Less strain, more warmth, longer rest. You prepare simple food that goes down easily. Broth again, soft bread, nothing heavy. You notice how smell alone seems to help lifting the room slightly. Appetite returns slowly. You encourage eating but gently. Forcing food helps no one. You check bedding, gain feeling for dampness. Illness thrives where moisture lingers. You dry blankets carefully one at a time, rotating them near the fire. The cabin fills with warmth and quiet movement. Everyone understands the change in rhythm. There is an old habit you remember passed down, without explanation, of warming stones near the hearth and wrapping them in cloth to place near aching joints or feet. You do it now without questioning whether it truly helps. The warmth soothes. That is enough. Outside you hear wind move through trees. Inside you keep voices low. Loud sound tires the body faster when strength dips. You notice how the cabin feels different today. Less active, more contained. Winter teaches flexibility in these moments. You stay alert for changes. Fever, shallow breath, confusion. None appear. That steadiness feels like relief. Many winter illnesses pass this way, never becoming severe, simply moving through slowly. Others did not. Outcomes varied widely, even among families who did everything right. This uncertainty shaped caution more than fear. You think about remedies people relied on. Herbal teas made from dried plants saved from summer. Poultices applied with hope as much as knowledge. Some helped, some did nothing. Still, the act of tending mattered. Care itself became medicine. As the day moves on, energy returns in small increments. Someone laughs softly at a shared memory. The sound feels fragile but welcome. You allow it. Spirits matter. Laughter warms more than fire sometimes. By evening the heaviness has eased. Not gone, but lighter. You bank the fire and prepare for night with extra care. Illness makes nights harder. You ensure warmth will last. You arrange sleeping places so those feeling weakest lie closest to heat. You lie down and listen to breathing around you. Steady, present. You match your own breath to that rhythm and let your body rest deeply. Winter sickness is not always a battle. Often it is a negotiation. You slow down, it eases up. You pay attention, it passes. As sleep comes, you feel gratitude for small things, warmth held, illness contained. Another day survived quietly. You wake up feeling clearer than yesterday, but not careless. The heaviness has retreated just enough to remind you that strength returns slowly here. You sit up and let the cabin come into focus. Fire low but steady. Air dry enough. Breathing easy. These small confirmations shape your mood more than any thought of optimism ever could. Mental survival becomes its own kind of work as winter stretches on. The body adapts first, the mind follows more slowly. You notice how thoughts circle familiar paths if you let them. Worry about supplies, worry about weather, worry about time itself. Left unchecked, those loops tighten. You counter them with routine, the same small actions in the same order each morning. Fire, water, food, light tasks, these steps ground you. They remind your mind that the day has shape even if the outside world looks the same as yesterday. You give yourself permission to move slowly. Productivity here is not measured by output, but by steadiness. Some days, the greatest success is doing nothing that makes tomorrow harder. You remind yourself of this without ceremony. You notice how conversations change in long winters. Words become fewer, more deliberate. Silence stretches comfortably when everyone understands its purpose. Talking fills space, but it also drains energy. You learn when to speak and when to let quiet do its work. There is a habit you fall into without realizing it. Counting small victories. The fire held all night. No dampness this morning. Everyone ate. These are not celebrations, they are markers. Evidence that the system is still working. You keep your hands busy. Mending fabric, sharpening a blade just a little, rearranging supplies so they feel orderly. Order calms the mind. It gives the illusion of control, which in winter can be as valuable as control itself. You notice how people respond differently to the same conditions. One person grows restless, pacing near the door. Another withdraws content to sit and watch the fire. Neither reaction is wrong. You adjust expectations accordingly. Winter does not reward forcing sameness. You offer small choices where you can. Which task to do first, where to sit, when to rest. Choice restores agency. It reminds the mind that it still participates, not merely endures. You think about the stories told in this place, not dramatic ones, familiar ones. The same few retold with slight variations. Each retelling reinforces memory and identity. These stories anchor people to a version of themselves that existed before the cold narrowed life's options. You notice how humour works differently now. Quieter, drier. A glance, a shared look. A small comment that releases tension without inviting noise. Laughter here is brief but potent. It reminds everyone that they are still themselves beneath the layers. You step outside briefly to reset your senses. The cold hits cleanly. Your breath sharpens. You look at the horizon unchanged and vast. This contrast helps. It frames the cabin as refuge rather than confinement. You return inside feeling steadier. You keep an eye on the children, not for illness now, but for mood. Winter weighs on them differently. Energy dips, patience thins. You respond with tasks that feel purposeful but gentle. Sorting, counting, watching water heat. Evolvement prevents withdrawal. You notice how evenings feel longer now, not because of darkness alone, but because anticipation fades. In warmer times, evenings promise something new. Here they promise repetition. You learn to find comfort in that repetition instead of fighting it. You slow the fire intentionally as night approaches, not to save wood, but to signal rest. Fire becomes quieter. Voices follow. Bodies follow. This cue helps mind settle without discussion. You lie down and let your thoughts wander without attachment. Memories surface, small images from before winter. You do not cling to them, you let them pass. Nostalgia warms briefly but can also distract. Balance matters. Sleep arrives unevenly. You wake once or twice, not from discomfort but from habit. Each time you note that everything is still in place. That knowledge eases you back into rest. Morning comes again without fanfare. Another day shaped mostly like the last. This repetition no longer feels oppressive. It feels reliable. Mental endurance here is not about pushing forward. It is about staying present, about noticing small changes and responding calmly, about allowing time to pass without demanding it hurry. You rise and begin the day again, steady and alert. Winter continues, but so do you. You notice the hour first, not by light or darkness, but by the way sleep hesitates. Eyes close, then open again. Thoughts drift, then snag. This is the stretch of night when rest thins and attention sharpens. You sit up quietly, wrapping a blanket around your shoulders, and accept that staying awake a little longer will help everyone later. Stories belong to this hour. You do not announce them. You begin one softly, as if finishing a thought that has been ongoing all evening. The voice stays low, steady, shaped to match the fire's murmur. Words travel better when they are not pushed. People lean in without realizing they have moved. The stories are not new. They rarely are. Familiar paths are easier to follow when the mind is tired. You tell them slowly, letting pauses do some of the work. A pause gives listeners time to breathe, time to warm, time to settle. It also gives you a moment to listen for the fire's tone, for the cabin's reply. You choose a story that can stretch or shrink depending on need. A journey that allows detours. A memory with room for repetition. You do not aim for suspense. Suspense wakes people too fully. You aim for rhythm. Predictable turns soothe. Someone adds a detail you forgot. Kits. You nod and fold it in. Another person corrects a place name gently. Accuracy matters less than participation, but the correction keeps minds engaged just enough to stay awake without strain. These small contributions keep the room balanced. You notice how hands move while listening. Fingers mend a seam, someone braids a cord, another stirs embers with a stick, careful and quiet. Stories give cover for these tasks, turning vigilance into something shared rather than solitary. There is a way of telling that keeps eyelids heavy while ears stay open. You use it now. Sentences land softly. Endings are rounded. You avoid sharp turns in the tale. The goal is not to finish. The goal is to carry the hour. A lesser-known habit surfaces in this hour. Someone taps the bench twice before settling a signal you have all come to recognize. It means the fire has been checked. No one asks. The story continues. Signals like this save words and preserve calm. You notice how stories change with the season. In early winter they are practical, advice disguised as memory. Later they become reflective. People talk about places rather than tasks. Faces soften when names return, the sound of a river, the smell of summer grass. You let these images pass through the room without lingering too long. Memory warms, but dwelling chills. You watch the fire while you speak timing phrases to its movement. When it pops, you pause. When it settles, you continue. This coordination keeps the room from jolting away. It also keeps you alert. Storytelling here is a kind of watch. You remember a winter account that mentioned counting breaths between sentences to stay awake without strain. You do not count now, but your breathing follows a steady pattern anyway. In through the nose, out slowly, the cadence carries your voice. Someone yawns. You smile without comment. A yawn means the balance is right. Awake enough to tend, drowsy enough to rest soon. You steer the story toward a familiar ending, one that can be reached gradually or delayed if needed. You include a small ordinary detail. A pot left on a hook. Footprints crossing a trail twice. These details ground listeners. They picture the scene easily. The mind relaxes when it recognizes shape and scale. You notice how the children listen differently. They track tone more than content. They lean into warmth and sound. You keep your voice even, careful not to rise. When a child shifts, you adjust the blanket without breaking the sentence. The story continues. The hour moves. The fire needs a small addition. You pause the story on a gentle note and add wood carefully. No flourish, no sparks. The flame takes. You resume without announcing the interruption. Continuity matters. There is an unspoken agreement in this room. Stories keep the night from stretching too thin. They hold attention lightly so no one slips too far into sleep while the fire is fragile. They also keep fear from growing shapes in the dark. A voice fills the space where imagination might wander. You let someone else take over for a bit. Their voice is different, rougher, slower. The change keeps you alert while giving your throat a rest. You listen now, tracking the fire and the room while the words flow past. Shared watchfulness feels lighter. A small laugh slips out at a familiar line. It is brief and quiet, enough to release tension, not enough to wake anyone fully. You nod to the teller, encouraging the pace to stay even. You notice how time passes without notice during these stories. That is their work. They do not measure time, they dissolve it. When the fire settles into a deep, reliable glow, you feel the shift in your body before you name it. You signal gently, a hand on the bench, a pause held a little longer. The story winds down naturally like a path returning home. No one objects, no one asks for more. The room is ready. You check the fire once more. The sound is right. The glow is steady. You bank it with care. Ash settles, heat holds. You look around and see eyelids closed, shoulders slackened, breathing deepened. You lie down and pull the blanket close. The last words of the story echo faintly, then fade. Silence returns, not empty but content. In this place, stories are not entertainment. They are tools. They keep hands steady, minds calm, and nights intact. Tonight they have done their work. You let sleep take you, knowing the fire will hold long enough. You notice the work that never announces itself. It happens before the fire is stirred and after everyone else has settled. It happens while others speak and while others sleep. It leaves no single moment to point at and say this is when it was done. And yet without it, the cabin would begin to fail in quiet ways. You watch hands move without pause, not hurried, not dramatic, just steady. Cloth is folded and refolded, always shaken first to release cold air trapped inside. Seams are checked by touch rather than sight, fingers lingering where fabric thins. A loose thread is pulled well and tucked away for later. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is rushed. You realize how much planning happens without discussion. Meals appear at the right moments, not because someone asked, but because the timing has been learned. Warm food arrives before exhaustion turns into weakness. A small portion is saved without comment for later, when someone wakes cold in the night. These choices are made quietly based on observation rather than instruction. Water is managed constantly. Snow is melted in stages, never all at once. Too much steam makes the air heavy, too little leaves no reserve. Containers are rotated so none freeze solid. You see how lids are loosened just enough to prevent cracking, how vessels are moved closer or farther from the hearth as if by instinct. This choreography keeps the cabin breathing. Clothing care never truly stops, while others' rest garments are turned, brushed, warmed and repositioned. Damp cuffs are dried before they chill wrists later. Socks are aired even if they look fine. The difference between fine and safe is learned through experience. You understand now how easily small neglect becomes a long night of discomfort. You notice how children are watched from the edges rather than the centre. Someone is always aware of where they are, what they are touching, how close they sit to the fire. Corrections are gentle. A hand moves a sleeve back from flame. A blanket is pulled up without waking. Guidance happens without drawing attention. Food stores are checked by feel and smell more than sight. A bag is lifted and weighed in the hand. A knot is retied slightly tighter. A scrap is set aside for soup rather than left to harden. These decisions do not look important on their own. Together they decide whether supplies last. You realize how much knowledge lives in repetition. The same motions performed daily teach the body what the mind might forget. There is no written list, no spoken reminder. The work teaches itself through doing. Over time, these motions become as automatic as breathing. You watch as a small tear is repaired with thread that does not quite match. Matching does not matter. Strength does. The needle moves slowly, deliberately, guided by fingers that know fabric by resistance alone. When the repair is finished, the garment is folded and placed where warmth will finish the job. Nothing is announced, the work simply moves on. You think about how rarely this labour is described in dramatic accounts. Stories often focus on storm-survived journeys made dangers faced outside. Inside work fades into the background even though it never stops. The cabin does not collapse because someone faced the cold bravely. It holds because someone noticed a seam before it split. There is care in how people are woken and how they are allowed to sleep. Someone who needs rest is shielded from unnecessary tasks. Someone restless is given something simple to do. Balance is kept without discussion. This attentiveness smooths rough edges before they cut. You notice how hands pause, occasionally resting near the hearth. Not from laziness, but from awareness. Overworked hands become clumsy. Clumsy hands drop kettles, spill water, tear fabric. Rest is folded into labour without apology. As evening approaches, the room is quietly reset. Bedding is fluffed and aired. Sleeping places are adjusted based on who needs warmth most tonight. No one announces these changes. They are simply there when needed. Blankets appear where they should be. You feel how this work shapes the atmosphere. The cabin feels held together, not just by logs and fire, but by attention. By someone noticing before things become problems. By someone choosing prevention over repair whenever possible. You understand now that survival here is not only about endurance, it is about maintenance. About countless small acts that keep systems from failing. About hands that never quite stop moving even when the rest of the body is tired. When night settles in, this work continues in quieter form. A final check of the fire, a final sweep of the floor, a final adjustment of blankets. These actions close the day gently, like turning down a lamp rather than extinguishing it. You lie down and feel the result of this unseen labour around you. Warmth held where it should be, air balanced, clothing ready for morning, the cabin feels prepared. You realise something that had not been obvious before. The hardest work here is not hauling wood or facing storms. It is sustaining the ordinary. Doing the same careful things every day without recognition, because stopping would unravel everything. As sleep comes, you rest inside that quiet competence. The work has been done not once, but continuously, and because of it, the night feels manageable. You notice how the door changes, meaning once winter settles in. Inside it is protection, outside it is obligation. Stepping through it is never casual now. Every trip beyond the threshold carries weight, not because danger is constant, but because it is always possible. You pull on layers, deliberately checking each one by touch rather than sight. Gloves fit snugly, laces are tied with care. Nothing is rushed. Those who worked outside in deep cold learned that preparation mattered more than strength. A poorly tied boot could numb a foot in minutes. A loose scarf could freeze stiff against skin. You pause before opening the door, listening. Wind tells you what kind of cold waits. Still air feels heavier, more dangerous. Moving air bites sharply but announces itself. You choose your moment and step out, closing the door behind you with finality. Outside, the cold grips instantly. It feels solid, pressing against face and chest. You keep your breathing measured. Fast breaths burn. Slow ones warm slightly before reaching the lungs. You move with purpose, not speed. Speed invites sweat. Sweat invites trouble. Work beyond the cabin is rarely dramatic. It is brief, necessary, and calculated. Checking the woodpile, clearing snow from the roof edge, resetting a trap. Each task is chosen carefully, weighed against the cost of exposure. People who survived long winters learn to combine tasks whenever possible. One trip out, multiple purposes, no wasted movement. You feel how tools behave differently out here. Metal bites through gloves if you hold it too long. Wood handles feel safer, warmer. You switch hands, often keeping blood moving. Fingers are watched constantly. Colour matters, sensation matters. Numbness arrives quietly and lies convincingly. You think about how many accidents happen just steps from the door. Slips on packed snow, a dropped tool, a glove blown away by the wind. These were not heroic moments. They were ordinary mistakes made costly by temperature. Caution becomes habit because consequences are immediate. You glance back at the cabin, often not out of fear but orientation. White landscapes flatten distance. Familiar landmarks disappear under snow. The cabin's shape anchors you, keeps you from drifting mentally as well as physically. There is a quiet tension in these moments. Not panic, awareness. You know that time outside is limited. You feel it in your face, in your fingers, in the way a breath crystallizes instantly. You finish the task and turn back without lingering. Inside, the door closes and relief arrives in stages. First the absence of wind, then the smell of smoke, then warmth returning slowly to skin. You do not rush the thaw. Hands are warmed gradually. Sudden heat hurts and can cause damage of its own. You sit near the hearth and wait until tingling fades. Others watch you return without comment. A glance exchanged, a nod. These small acknowledgements replace conversation. Everyone understands what it costs to step outside. No praise is needed. You think about how responsibility shapes risk. Certain tasks fall consistently to those best able to handle exposure, not because of tradition alone, but because bodies differ. Height, strength, tolerance, experience, families adjusted roles quietly based on outcomes rather than ideals. There is an old habit you recall where people mark the time of outdoor work by the number of breaths they took rather than minutes. 10 breaths to the fieldwood pile, 20 to clear snow. Whether accurate or not, it kept attention focused. Counting breaths keeps panic away. You check your clothing for moisture and hang it carefully. Steam rises and fades. You rotate gloves near the hearth, pressing them gently to release dampness. Wet gloves are useless tomorrow. As the day progresses, more trips outside may be needed. Each one is planned. Each one is brief. No one goes out just to move. Movement must justify itself. You notice how fatigue sets in differently after outdoor work. Not sharp exhaustion, but a deep heaviness that settles into muscles and bones. Cold drains energy even when tasks are short. Rest becomes part of the work cycle. You sit and let warmth rebuild before doing anything else. At times you sense frustration. The world outside feels hostile, indifferent. Yet you also know it is simply cold, not malicious.